Good day, and welcome to Blueprint for Clean Energy, a webinar speaker series hosted by the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. My name is Rohini Mukherjee, and I will be your host for today's webinar titled Market Strategies for Renewable Thermal Technologies in New England. The Blueprint for Clean Energy webinar series invites leading practitioners and researchers in the field of clean energy to talk about the latest opportunities and developments in corporate, nonprofit, and public-private arenas. Heating and cooling our buildings and industrial processes make up a major part of the energy system in the Northeastern United States. Renewable heating and cooling is a key opportunity to achieve ambitious energy and greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. While Massachusetts released its renewable thermal strategy in 2014, Connecticut and New York just recently published roadmaps for renewable heating and cooling. The opportunities and challenges are, to a large extent, shared across the states. Our webinar will start with Neil Veilleux from Meister Consultants Group, a lead author of International Energy Agency's report, Waking the Sleeping Giant, and a key consultant to several of the states. He will give an overview of opportunities and policies in the renewable heating and cooling space in the Northeastern United States. Following Neil's overview, we will be joined by panelists from Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York. These panelists will present their thoughts on market strategies to bring renewable heating and cooling to scale in their own states and regions. Before we begin, we would like to encourage our listeners to submit any questions you might have. Towards the end of the talk, we will direct them to our speakers. Throughout the presentation, type your questions directly into the Q&A window. And with that, we would like to begin the webinar on market strategies for renewable thermal technologies in New England with Mr. Neil Veilleux, Vice President of the Meister Consultants Group. Mr. Veilleux, welcome to Blueprint for Clean Energy.
Hi, Rohini. Thanks so much. Good to be here. Can you hear me all right? And can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we're all good.
Great. Thanks so much. So I'll give you a brief overview today of some of the challenges, barriers, and policy and program opportunities, as well as some of the initiatives that are taking place as it relates to renewable heating and cooling in the Northeast states. As background, we also do a lot of work internationally for folks like IEA, UNEP, UNDP on these topics as well. So in many cases, we're bringing sort of international best practices to bear on what we see happening in New England and New York's local policy markets. So yeah, to kick it off, let's just sort of talk about what renewable heating and cooling technologies are. So conventionally, we heat our buildings with fuels like coal or heating oil, natural gas, propane, electric resistance, or other fossil fuels. But a number of policymakers have noted that if they're going to achieve their 80 by 50 greenhouse gas reduction goals, they really have to decarbonize the heating and cooling sector. And so they're looking more and more to a range of renewable heating and cooling technologies, which is a broad basket of technologies, including solar heating and cooling, heat pumps, both air and ground source heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, sustainable bioenergy, anaerobic digestion, and combined heat and power. And it's worth noting that depending on the jurisdiction, different policymakers will sort of consider different technologies within the renewable heating and cooling sector. So some may focus on heat pumps, others may focus on bioenergy, others may focus on solar heating and cooling. It's also worth noting that it's a really diverse sector, the heating and cooling sector. So you have different applications, right, for space heating and cooling, hot water, process heat, or humidity and ventilation needs. You also have very diverse building stock across the residential, commercial, and industrial sector. And then you even have diverse ways of sort of distributing or transmitting the heat from on-site units, right, like high efficiency, low emission biomass heating pellet units, to large-scale district heating and cooling networks, right, that serve many, many buildings. And because of this diversity, it's often challenging to sort of think about renewable heating and cooling in just one way. And so different policymakers, depending on their infrastructure, right, or their policy goals, may pursue different strategies across these sectors. Um, Generally speaking, there's a number of drivers that are pushing renewable policymakers to pursue renewable heating and cooling. So climate mitigation is certainly a big driver. Climate adaptation, energy security, right? Using local renewable resources, and economic development are all major drivers. From the consumer side, we tend to see different drivers, right? Consumers looking for cost savings, where applicable, building comfort, perhaps stability in pricing, and green leadership. But sort of you bring them all together and you start to think through what are the right strategies for different jurisdictions. Generally speaking, we see three broad strategies emerging that I just want to briefly touch on across the states and across international jurisdictions. So some jurisdictions are looking at strategic electrification of the heating and cooling sector, right? So in that case, it's sort of seek to electrify heating loads by scaling up ground source or air source heat pumps, or by pursuing solar heating and cooling. A lot of opportunity here requires sort of a change in regulatory approach for utilities that would enable fuel switching to really bring it to scale. But there's also opportunities to synergize this approach with the transportation sector. Other jurisdictions will pursue district heating and cooling networks. We see less of this in the US, though it's been deployed quite broadly in Europe in particular. But outside of some campuses and some legacy systems, we don't see that much district heating and cooling in the US. There are opportunities here for CHP in particular, and especially biomass-based CHP. And a lot of work needs to be done on the business and financing models, as well as the regulatory requirements to sort of see this approach go to scale. And then there's also sort of a third bucket in the strategy approach of centralized or decentralized bioenergy-based heating networks. And this includes a lot of different approaches, right? From anaerobic digestion, it could include biofuels. It could include sort of large-scale biomass that's injected directly into natural gas pipelines, as well as sort of biomass heating and cooling using pellets or chips. Depending on your strategy, there's a range of different barriers, though, that you'll most likely confront as you seek to develop the market. And it's really worth noting that the renewable heating and cooling market across the US is really quite small, right? Very, very small fraction of buildings are heated with renewable sources like this. I'm not going to spend much time on these barriers, but I do want you to be aware of the range of them. So policy and regulatory barriers, technical and building barriers, especially low refurbishment rates. People typically replace their heating and cooling system only maybe once every 15 or 30 years, right? So that means that you really got to sort of target them now if you want to try to get to that 80 by 2050 goals. A number of economic barriers, including high installed cost, awareness challenges. Many people aren't aware of renewable heating and cooling and sort of don't understand the benefits or the challenges of it. Decision-making barriers are like split incentives, right, or ownership priorities. Many businesses want to sort of put their money in their core business, and higher capital costs of any renewable heating and cooling systems may be a disincentive. And then supply chain barriers. In a number of markets, the supply chain is just not well developed, or there's a great need for additional training. But to address these barriers, there's sort of a range of approaches that we see policymakers taking. And again, I'll just very briefly touch on these, but I expect the other panelists will talk through a number of them. So in some states, we see planning and sort of formal targets established, which is a great signal to investors. Other states are sort of pursuing mandates, whether they're building mandates or utility mandates, right, that require a certain percentage of renewable heat be deployed. Certainly New Hampshire, for example, has the first of the nation renewable thermal RPS carve-out. Marketing and outreach initiatives. I'm sure Peter today will talk about the Heat Smart program that Mass CEC is deploying to try to increase awareness of renewable heat. Innovative financing mechanisms, especially third-party ownership products, and standardization and aggregation of assets. And I think our colleagues from Connecticut will talk about some of those that are being deployed. Cost reductions is a real opportunity too in NYSERDA. Eric and Scott from NYSERDA, I'm sure, will talk through the cost reduction initiatives that they are launching for the renewable heating and cooling sector. Workforce development, certainly, there's a range of incentives across the states that are available, and also QA/QC programs, which are especially important as you're deploying these technologies to ensure that they are operating as expected and will sort of help you achieve those greenhouse gas reduction goals or energy savings as planned. There's actually a lot going on across the Northeast for the renewable heating and cooling sector. As Rohini mentioned, Massachusetts established one of the earliest initiatives to address the renewable heating and cooling space, which culminated in the Commonwealth Accelerated Renewable Thermal Strategy. But they also have a number of rebate programs at Mass CEC and other initiatives rolling out. Maine is actually currently engaged in the sustainable biomass energy study. They also have a very high percentage of oil heat in the state, and Efficiency Maine, the state agency, provides a number of rebates and financing programs to support deployment of heat pumps and other technologies. And then in Rhode Island just came out with its renewable thermal market development strategy. There's some limited rebates for air source heat pumps in particular in the state. And we'd expect to see more activity in Rhode Island in the future. New Hampshire, as I mentioned, has the first in the nation RPS carve-outs. Vermont has been focusing on strategic electrification as part of its comprehensive energy plan, and also offers a number of rebates through its existing programs. And then Connecticut, I should actually reveal, Yale and the Connecticut Green Bank are sort of working on a number of market studies, and they also offer rebates for a number of the technologies. And then finally, New York just came out with its cost reduction study and its renewable heating and cooling framework, which I'm sure those folks will talk about today. And they also have a number of incentives available for ground source heat pumps. And I expect that we'll see how it rolls out, that there'll be sort of a further ramp up of support for renewable heat in the state through 2017. Finally, just before I wrap up here, I just want to give a little plug to the Renewable Thermal Alliance that is led by Yale. That's doing a lot of work with stakeholders across the region to explore renewable heating and cooling opportunities, both policies, financing programs, standardization, and so on and so forth. I think one particularly interesting aspect is the standardization working group that is really seeking to expand availability of capital and lower the cost of capital for renewable heating and cooling technologies. And there's a number of initiatives that are sort of beginning to take shape under the RTA to enable that to happen. Including sort of establishing clear guidelines for thermal energy metering and exploring new business models like third-party ownership models for heating sector and standardizing the associated contracts. So just sort of another interesting option out there for you guys all to consider as you think about renewable heat in the future. At any rate, I'll pause there. Rohini, I think I ran a little long. My apologies, and turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview, Neil. So if you're just joining us, we finished the first part of the webinar with Mr. Neil Veilleux from the Meister Consultants Group, who gave an overview of the opportunities, market barriers, and policies in the renewable heating and cooling space in the Northeastern United States. In the next part of the webinar, panelists from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York will present their thoughts on market strategies to bring renewable heating and cooling to scale in their own states and regions. Then we'll pose questions to our panelists for the Q&A session. And with that, we would like to welcome Mr. Peter McPhee from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to take us through the renewable heating and cooling technologies in the state of Massachusetts. Mr. McPhee, welcome to Blueprint for Clean Energy.
Thank you, Rohini, and thank you, Neil, for the great background. I'm going to talk today a little bit about where we stand 3 years after the roadmap that Neil referenced for Massachusetts. I'll be focusing really on 4 individual topics. Number 1, what strategies have we implemented to date from that roadmap? Number 2, what are the external market factors that have changed in the meantime since that roadmap was published? Number 3, what are the results that we've seen to date? And lastly, what there still is to do here in Massachusetts. So to back up even a little bit further, in 2012, also working with Meister Consultants Group, we commissioned the Opportunities and Impact Study, which identified some of the opportunities for renewable thermal in Massachusetts. In that same year, we launched solar thermal and renewable heating pilots to sort of test out the industry and see what kind of impact we could have on developing the industry. Our official roadmap for renewable thermal that Neil referenced was published in very early 2014, so the Commonwealth Accelerated Renewable Thermal Strategy, the CARTS report. And at the heart of that report was really an extensive industry stakeholder process that identified what are the tools and what are the needs for the industry to really grow and be successful in the long term. In 2014, we also had a pretty significant piece of legislation passed which is known as the adding renewable heating into the alternative portfolio standard, which is essentially a performance incentive for technologies, including renewable thermal. In 2015, we had a new governor take office, Governor Baker, and in the same year we launched, MassCC launched a 5-year, $30 million commitment to the clean heating and cooling technologies. You can see with each of these milestones over the last 5 years, I put the oil price at the time that those changes were made. You can see we started at $4.20 per gallon. The great report that Neil managed came out when oil was $4.07 per gallon. And today, as I'm giving this update, it's at about $2.65 per gallon. So important external market factors that we've seen in the meantime. To put that into perspective, here's the oil price since that time, starting a little bit over $4. And I'd say the timing of the oil price decline was impeccably inconvenient for our programs and for us to really be driving the market the way we wanted to. That being said, we've still been able to move forward in the market, but it is important to understand what these external factors are, because I think these fossil fuel prices are probably one of the biggest factors that have influenced the rate of adoption of these technologies. Overlaid here is the electricity price during the time. Starting in 2015, there were some significant electricity price spikes during the winter periods, which certainly have affected the technologies, including especially the heat pumps that constitute a core component of a renewable thermal strategy. And because these price spikes occur during the winter, they have an additional impact on the heating cost. So to make that a little more apples to apples, what this graph does is it's comparing different heating costs for oil and heat pumps on an equivalent delivered heating basis, so dollars per million BTU since inception. This is the oil curve we've seen. Then here we have the what would be considered probably an air source heat pump, so having a COP of about 2.5. We can see that at the early stages of this period, the heat pump was more cost effective, even by 30% relative to heating with oil. However, a year later, the costs have sort of shifted where it was higher than heating with oil. If we look at a heat pump with a COP of 4, we see that those costs have been pretty much lower for most of the time, but still track with some of the same fluctuations and some of those wintertime electricity spikes. So Massachusetts does have very high electricity prices, and that's been one of the challenges, I think, with the heat pump technology. So just to caveat this, we're not considering upfront costs here at all, so that's not taken into account, nor are we looking at the cooling benefits that we see from these technologies. So one of the lessons learned, I think, as Neil mentioned, is if a heating system's operating for 15, 20, 30 years, fossil fuels and electricity prices will certainly fluctuate. They've fluctuated in the past and they'll fluctuate in the future. So I think it's really important for us to consider taking a longer term view of pricing, and also to have the appropriate messaging around what costs will be for technology going forward. So within the roadmap, which had an extensive dozens of strategies for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to implement across multiple agencies and groups, I want to take a look at what we've accomplished in that time. I'd like to think that we've perhaps implemented 50% of the strategies in the roadmap. It might be a little bit generous, but that's sort of more or less where we are. Number one was developing technology goals, which we did through the Global Warming Solution Act and the Clean Energy and Climate. Number three, we've expanded our low-income programs for renewable heating across multiple building types. We've done a lot of example projects at state buildings, and also continued with the low-cost financing that's available through the utilities. We've convened several industry advisory forums, and we are working on implementing the performance-based incentives through the alternative portfolio standard. So quite a bit, but definitely not everything that was on there. And the result of that, what I'm presenting here is really the annual adoption rates that we're seeing at this moment across the different technologies. So I've had to use a logarithmic scale to present this data, just given the volume of air source heat pumps that we've seen coming through our program. So we're seeing about 5,000 per year in Massachusetts, while the other technologies, ground source and solar thermal, about 100, biomass heating, only about 20. So with air source heat pumps and solar thermal being supplemental technologies, however, they're not necessarily offsetting all the energy use in a home. So what I did was I took a look at what would sort of be the equivalent of a whole home being offset for these different technologies, and using some pretty conservative numbers here. But a recent Cadmus study for the utilities identified that people may not be using air source heat pumps as extensively as was anticipated, which really reduces the benefits that they might be bringing. While the technology was performing well, they just weren't seeing the usage hours where they should be. So air source heat pumps and solar thermal are derated to show that they're not providing 100% of the heating energy for a home. To take this a step further, what I did was subtract out the component of these heating systems that wasn't renewable. So that really affects the heat pumps where there's an electricity contribution. And so what we see here is that air source heat pumps still are, really almost an order of magnitude above the nearest competitor in volume and ultimately in energy benefits that they're bringing. And for the other technologies, we are at a much lower rate. And air source heat pumps continue to grow at about 40% year over year in adoption in Massachusetts, while the others have remained relatively flat as adoption rates over the years. So each of these technologies has certain critical questions that I think we're asking. So with air source heat pumps, how are they used? Are they being used as whole home heating systems or really just supplemental? For ground source heat pumps, will these costs ever become more competitive? For solar thermal, which is our longest standing program, will industry move the needle from the relatively sluggish growth rate that we have now? And that could be comprised of perhaps lowered costs or increased localized adoption. Will biomass heating upfront costs and fuel costs become more competitive? And essentially, with about 200,000 heating upgrades per year in Massachusetts, only about 1 to 3% could be called renewable heating and cooling systems. We really need to increase that by at least an order of magnitude to get to about 30% of these changeovers being renewable heating systems, and to make sure that they're being used correctly. So there's still a lot to do. We plan to be launching a thermalized program in the coming months, which we're calling Heat Smart after the New York program in Tompkins County. There's a strong need for public outreach campaign, and that's something that we're considering how we could do. It's a little bit out of our wheelhouse, but there's certainly a lack of awareness that needs to be addressed. A lot of these other factors which are in the strategy from the CARTS report are things that we would like to get into, but for a number of reasons haven't been able to prioritize it up to this point. So I think some of the most important lessons learned for a blueprint is implementing a roadmap is certainly a lot of work. It takes staff time, it takes money, and it really takes convincing of all the different decision makers on a state level. To do it well, I think it takes a long-term commitment, stable policies, to really invigorate the industry. It can't be necessarily done in a short time period. It really will take decades. And the awareness of the concepts for renewable thermal have really, in Massachusetts, started 5+ years ago, but it's really taken several years to even get that to be part of the regular dialogue, so that this can be incorporated in the decision-making on the state level and the utility level. It can really be considered a part of clean energy and solutions for getting to more aggressive greenhouse gas reductions. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rohini, and here's my contact information if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. Next, we would like to welcome Jennifer Parsons from the United Illuminating Company and Laura Veilleux from the Connecticut Green Bank to take us through the opportunities of renewable heating and cooling in Connecticut. Hi, Jennifer. Can you hear me okay?
Hi there. I apologize. I was having a little technical difficulty. I have unmuted myself right now, and I'm ready to get going. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Jennifer Parsons. I work at United Illuminating Electric Company in Connecticut, and I am here today to share with you the utility perspective on what we are doing to research renewable thermal technologies, as well as specifically what we are doing to promote heat pump technology, one of the renewable thermal technologies that exists in our state. And the second half of the Connecticut presentation segment will be completed by our partners at the Connecticut Green Bank. So I will start my utility update right now. A little background on the Connecticut energy efficiency programs we operate under a state-mandated program called the Energize Connecticut Initiative. It is a partnership between United Illuminating, Eversource Energy, and the Connecticut Green Bank that is overseen by our Energy Efficiency Board that works for the state of Connecticut. And we implement a number of different energy efficiency programs throughout the state to help with energy efficiency in general, and also what I'm going to be discussing today, the heat pump side of efficiency. A snapshot of the electric service territory in Connecticut. We have two major utility companies, United Illuminating in the pink colored towns where I work, Eversource Energy is the blue towns, and then we have a few towns that are municipal electric providers. And in total, UI and Eversource have approximately 1.5 million electric, residential, and commercial customers. In Connecticut, our governor has issued a goal for the state to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% below the 2001 level by the year 2020. So in order to achieve this goal, one of the tasks that we at United Illuminating, as well as Eversource and the Connecticut Green Bank, initiated with the assistance of Yale was to have a market potential and feasibility study completed for renewable thermal technology to study the technical, economic, and achievable potential of the technology and identify any market barriers and drivers that exist. As a result of that study, we had a compilation of how the residential sector, commercial sector, and industrial sector have the thermal demand breakout. So in every state, we have a need on the residential sector, commercial, and industrial sector for heating and cooling, and currently the demand is being supplied through a variety of different fuel types. And we found through this study that Yale helped complete for us that approximately 19% of Connecticut's current thermal demand can be offset through renewable thermal technologies right now. And through a lot of sensitivity analysis and research, we determined that the most cost-effective heating fuel to displace with renewable thermal technology are homes and businesses that currently use electric resistance heat for their space heating or other types of applications. And in the diagram up on the screen, you can see that electric resistance heat and across a number of different building type sectors is a really great focus point for heat pump and adoption and displacement of traditional electric resistance heat. There were a few barriers that were observed in the survey for what we at the utility company are working and at the Green Bank towards overcoming. A main point is the upfront cost of renewable thermal technology to get it installed. There's also tends to be a lack of trust and education in the general public of the technology. We need to help with market interventions to improve the operational cash flow for projects to become feasible. And it also would be ideal for building codes and standards to help reduce the thermal demand and establish a predictable minimum market for renewable thermal technology in general. In my work at United Illuminating, I manage the residential heating and cooling and water heating programs, and I interact with a number of customers, contractors, and equipment manufacturers and distributors on a daily basis. And through my time here at UI, I found there's a few major reasons why customers want to install a heat pump in their house. A main point that I've discovered that was also evident in the study was that customers who have electric resistance heat, displacing with a renewable thermal heat pump is a really great opportunity for them to save energy and be more efficient. Other customers want to add cooling to their home, and then other customers want to displace their existing oil heat, especially when prices are high, as Peter also indicated in his slides earlier in this presentation. I myself have a natural gas boiler, and since I don't have any ductwork in my home, it was a lot more cost effective to have cooling installed through a ductless heat pump system, which I installed last year. In Connecticut at the UI and Eversource, we have a number of incentives available for air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and then heat pump water heaters as well, to try to encourage our residential customers to install this technology. Energy Star heat pumps are always our minimum efficiency requirement, and our incentives range from $300 all the way up to $1,500 for a geothermal system. We have a mix of rebate redemption options. There's a mail-in rebate, and there's also an upstream instant discount available at participating equipment distributors. And what we found over the past few years, as Peter also showed in his previous slides, that with the price of oil, with the price of oil reducing, the demand for ductless heat pumps has also reduced, and it was evident in the reduction in the number of rebates being redeemed from UI and Eversource residential customers. So what we identified a few years ago in the heat pump water heater sector was to move incentives upstream so that they are instantly discounted at the point of sale to help reduce upfront costs. And the first two set of bars for the heat pump water heaters show that with a upstream instant discount mechanism in place, we increased our sales in 2016 compared to 2015. When you look at ductless heat pumps, air source heat pumps, and ground source heat pumps, those next three sets of bars, those have decreased in the number of redemptions. So what UI and Eversource implemented this year to help reduce that dip in incentives was the ductless heat pump equipment now is also an instant discount at the point of sale for contractors to get a reduced upfront cost for their residential customers. We found that hopefully with our upstream instant discount process this year in 2017 for ductless heat pumps, we are very encouraged that that will help with the adoption of heat pumps in our residential customers' homes. We are partnering with our Home Energy Solutions, the energy audit program that we offer our residential customers, to help target with additional incentives and financing the customers that have electric resistance heat. We really want to help those customers in particular install ductless heat pumps or air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps as a great alternative for their current situation. We partner with financing agencies that Laura will get into in just a few slides to help make the cost of heat pump technology easily accessible for our customers. We offer a number of technical training courses, partnering with equipment distributors and equipment manufacturers to train our contractors on proper installation of the technology. We held 9 trainings last year. We've already held 2 this year so far, and many more historically we've held as well. And we try to engage the public in the informational sessions on heat pump technology through our website, as well as we just recently sponsored a geothermal conference where the public was encouraged to come learn about the technology. Looking ahead, we're going to continue to focus on promoting the upstream instant discount model to make upfront costs less of an issue. We're going to continue to partner with financing agencies to promote financing. We have to continue to educate the public and the contractor base so that they are familiar with the technology and comfortable with it and trust it, and then install it correctly. But going forward, we have a few topics that we really would love assistance from other entities to look into. One of them being the need for either the state level or federal level government policy, public policy and engagement in the heat pump strategic electrification goals for the Northeast. I think having better directives from our state and federal government will help lead the utilities down another path for heat pump adoption for our customers. And we also think that it would be beneficial if more states throughout the Northeast would engage in potential studies and feasibility studies to look at how heat pump technology can be and renewable thermal technology can be applied in different zones that have higher or lower heating degree days, as well as look at it across different fuel types and fuel price points, because a lot of states in the Northeast, we don't all have the same electric rates, we don't all have the same heating degree day demand. So I think having an overall review of the Northeast as a whole is definitely something we would love to learn more about and have completed in the future by some other entities. If you have any questions specifically on what the United Illuminating and Eversource are completing for utility efficiency programs in Connecticut, the contact information for myself as well as our general website is up on the screen in front of you. And I am going to turn it over to Laura at the Connecticut Green Bank to go over the financing side of what's happening in Connecticut.
Thanks, Jennifer. Just give me one sec. I'm going to get my screen up and running for everyone.
Okay, sure.
Okay. There we go. So thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, Rohini, as well. Just following up on what Jennifer has just discussed, I thought it would be useful to give the Green Bank perspective and a bit of a summary on what the Green Bank's current initiatives are in renewable thermals and what we hope to initiate in the near future. I'll start just with a quick background on the Green Bank. I know some of you are probably familiar with the Green Bank, but just in case, we're a quasi-public organization, so we were set up by state statute to help the state meet its clean energy and emissions goals in a sort of sustainable financial manner. So the Green Bank itself has moved away from subsidies and grants, and instead we provide financing solutions, meaning that we can recycle our capital back into additional programs, and we can also leverage our seed capital or our public funding. And the public funding we receive is supported by a 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour surcharge on electric ratepayers, as well as proceeds from our regional greenhouse gas initiative auctions. The public sector funding provides about $35 million in revenue to the Green Bank, and what we do is we leverage that significantly with private sector capital, so with commercial banks in the region or at the national or global level. We currently hold about $130 million in assets on our balance sheet, but we've helped mobilize over $1 billion in investment, including assets not on our balance sheet and other programs we've facilitated. We've also had a direct impact on jobs, as well as an indirect impact on a much larger number, around 12,500. And in terms of clean energy deployment, we've helped deploy over 200 megawatts of renewables in the state, which has helped reduce emissions by 2.5 million tons. So it's worth noting, and I know Jennifer has touched on this as well, is that there's a very real and recognized need to increase renewable thermal penetration in the state. So we've just had Yale publish its market potential and barrier study, which, as Jennifer discussed, shows that 19% of the thermal demand can be met in an economically competitive way by renewable thermals now. But a significant input into this study and an input into the competitiveness of renewable thermals going forward is actually fuel price, as has been a common theme in these discussions recently. But it's worth noting as well that modeling at the state level of our emissions reduction pathways to help the state meet its 80% target by 2050 has shown that there's a very significant, very real need to increase renewable thermals along with a strategic electrification strategy. So this is why we at the Green Bank, so we have a current program which provides financing for renewable thermals, which I'll get into in a moment. But we're in the process of scoping out additional programs and additional support, both at the state level and a regional level, that we hope to implement in the near future to sort of help advance these markets. Our current offering we have is on the residential side. We can offer loans up to $40,000, which would cover up to 100% of the cost, and this helps remove one of those significant barriers that's been discussed, which is the upfront cost of these technologies. The term of the loan can be anywhere from 5 to 15 years, and that will impact the interest rate that is available. Part of what the Green Bank does is we help de-risk financing, and we've also been able to provide an interest rate buy down. So you'll see that we have these special offers where we can provide an interest rate of 2.99%, and then after May 8th of this year, we've repurposed additional funding for this interest rate buy down, which means we can offer interest rates as low as 0.99%. And we're hoping that that will increase usage of this loan mechanism. Just as a bit of background, when I say special offers, these are either special bundles, specific combinations of measures that can be implemented. It applies to gas conversion, and it applies to heat pumps in particular. So air source heat pumps, ground source, and heat pump water heaters. Just a bit more detail on these loans. The eligible measures are quite wide ranging, so they include HVAC, they include solar PV, home efficiency measures, natural gas furnaces. And of the nearly 900 Smarty loans, over 200 have to date included heat pump measures. The lenders, so we work with 12 credit unions, community banks, and one CDFI in the area to provide these loans, and we've helped them get comfortable with this program by providing $1.8 million in a second loss reserve, which helps limit their losses. They've committed $30 million of loan capital to the program, and I mentioned our interest rate buy down, so we make available $2.5 million in interest rate buy down to help reduce the interest rate to the customer. We work with over 300 eligible contractors on the program, and while the banks themselves or the lenders themselves will undertake the underwriting, we've helped them get comfortable with FICO scores as low as 580 to help bolster the applicability of the program. In terms of future initiatives, so the idea of third-party ownership model has been discussed a lot, and this is something we're investigating to see. We've discussed this with other. Green Mountain Power in Vermont actually has a current air source heat pump lease program. We've been discussing this program with them and trying to figure out, what this would look like in Connecticut and how could this be applied to Connecticut. So we've been working with our Connecticut utilities as well to discuss the feasibility of this. What would we need to put this in place? But we see it as an interesting option. It would help end customers avoid any of the hassle associated with O&M, perhaps provide fixed lease payments. So there's a lot of aspects that could be attractive to customers in Connecticut that aren't currently comfortable taking out a loan for these technologies. It's also important to note that we're looking at this as a regional initiative, not just at the state level, because we know obviously if we have some sort of regional solutions in place, this will help bolster the market much more broadly than just at the state level. So in that regard, we are a founding member of the Renewable Thermal Alliance, which many of you may be aware of. I know Neil spoke a bit about its efforts as well to work on standardizing documents and measuring and verification of data from these technologies to help get lenders and financiers comfortable with the technologies. We've also been working closely with Meister to investigate regional solutions to overcome financial barriers as well, given that both New York and Connecticut have recently come out with our roadmap policies, and a lot of the suggested initiatives are aligned. So we're hoping to kick off that process and determine the actual regional solutions in the coming months. And with that, I will turn it back over to Rahini, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer and Laura. Next, we would like to welcome Mr. Scott Smith and Mr. Eric Scherer to take us through the renewable heating and cooling policy framework in the state of New York. Scott and Eric, welcome to Blueprint for Clean Energy.
Scott, are you on? I am. Thanks, Rahini. This is Scott Smith at Meister. We really appreciate you having us. We're going to have to go, I think, a little bit quickly through these slides since we're a little behind time. And with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen and turn it over to Eric Scherer.
Hi, everyone. While Scott is working on the screen sharing, this is Eric Scherer. I'm the Senior Advisor for Energy Analysis at Meister, and in that capacity, it's been my pleasure to support Meister's renewable heating and cooling team in developing our renewable heating and cooling policy framework throughout the past year or so. Our policy framework effectively does two things. It both sets out specific policy options, and Scott will take over from me in a second again to talk us through those. But underpinning those policy options, we also outlined what our actual strategy is, the strategy that we are going to pursue, not just in the short term, but also going forward into the next decade. There's quite a bit of background noise there from somewhere. Scott, are you okay getting our slides up?
I'm working on it.
Okay, no worries.
Can you see them now?
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, we can.
Working.
It's working. Thank you.
So might as well take us straight to slide 5, Scott.
Uh-oh.
Well, actually, this looks like a different slide pack to me, but
yep, no,
never mind. I know we're short on time, so I will start talking with or without slides. So as I was just starting to say, right, here we are. Very good. So I would like to summarize the strategic part of our framework, if you will. And so this is Scott, where slide 5 will work fine at this point. And our strategy starts with the recognition, and it's going to be an obvious one for the audience on this webinar, but it's surprising how little appreciation there is for this fact outside our immediate circle of experts. The first point in the strategy is the recognition that heating and cooling is a massive chunk of our overall energy use and is responsible for around 1/3 of our carbon emissions, and therefore any strategy aimed at goals of the order of magnitude of 40% carbon reduction by 2030 or 80% by 2050 requires significant decarbonization of the heating and cooling sector. That's the first point. And then secondly, next slide, please, Scott. Again, an obvious recognition probably, but it's nevertheless very important to make the point. Renewable heating and cooling is in a position to serve most, if not all, of our heating and cooling needs. Now, in our framework, at this point, we limited ourselves to considering space heating and cooling, so we have not yet covered process heating, where there are some more nuances to the story, but certainly on space heating and cooling, the main technologies that we covered in our framework, being air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and solar thermal, have the potential to replace the vast majority of heating and cooling needs under current technology options. And going forward, some further technology developments we would then expect to ensure that, as I said, almost all of the heating and cooling needs could probably be met by renewable heating and cooling. So with those 2 points in mind, the critical issue, and again, my third point is also an obvious one, is how to significantly increase adoption of these technologies. Next slide, please, Scott. So on this slide, you can see the core of our strategy, and it's composed of a number of layers. The first point I already made, that the objective is to increase the adoption rate of these technologies. That falls down into two components. The first one is to increase the cost effectiveness of these technologies, and that's really a critical point. And by cost effectiveness, we mean from the investor's point of view. So effectively, it means that anyone who puts down their money to install, let's say, a heat pump, would be expected to do so only if financially that makes sense. So only if there's a reasonable payback on the additional investment that we're asking them to make into these technologies. If that's the case, then it's a rational investment decision, and you would rationally expect the market to adopt these technologies. If that cost effectiveness is not there, then you would expect the market to remain a niche market. So cost effectiveness is the first key point. Then secondly, if and when you've unlocked cost effectiveness, that merely means that it makes financial sense to invest in these technologies. It does not yet mean that people actually do adopt the technology. So then there's a second component, which is all about increasing the uptake rates. Going back to cost effectiveness, we've already touched on this in a number of presentations in this call. Clearly, energy prices are critical to increasing cost effectiveness. And so if we look now specifically at the numbers on the screen, we started out with a very thorough analysis of the heating and cooling market as it stands today in New York. And again, perhaps not surprisingly, we concluded that there is only very, very limited cost effectiveness. Only a very small part of the market is currently in a position where you could say to an investor, yes, here it makes sense to invest into a heat pump to get a decent payback. The number on the screen is 4%, so that means out of all the market segments we analyzed in the state, we concluded that only in 4% of cases that kind of cost effectiveness is present. So at the moment, you would have to conclude that is a very, very marginal slice of the market. Now, if you take into consideration a reasonable expectation, a reasonable forecast of energy price increases over the coming years, under the energy price forecast assumptions we use in our analysis, you can see the slice of cost-effective resource increasing to 8%. Still, however, a marginal part of the overall market. So this is where it gets interesting. What else can we do to increase cost effectiveness? And there we identified two key components. The first is cost reductions. Obviously, if you reduce the additional cost of renewable heating and cooling technologies, then it's easier for them to compete cost effectively. And secondly, this has not been mentioned yet on this session, but we perceive it as a critical part of the puzzle. The second part is value monetization. This part of the story is not just about value monetization. It's really about what can we do to make additional revenue available to investors in into heat pumps and other renewable heating and cooling technologies. Traditionally, the means of doing so has been around incentives. And so incentives are clearly still part of that discussion, but the one bit that we want to add to that discussion is about value monetization. If and where we conclude that mostly heat pumps offer value to the grid, value to ratepayers or other value opportunities, then we have an opportunity to grab that value and transfer it, make it available, monetize it from the perspective of the investors. Where we do so, then an investor would see additional revenue coming in, and that would increase the opportunity for that investment to be cost effective. The story around value monetization is more detailed than I can cover in this presentation, so I would invite our audience to, if you have an opportunity, to look up our framework publication and read more about it there. But it is really a very exciting opportunity, because if you look at the numbers there, with the value that we analyzed, and that wasn't a comprehensive study of value, we merely focused on what we called grid value. That, together with the immediate cost reduction opportunities that we perceive, would increase the share of cost-effective resource to about a quarter of the market. And at that point, you really have a game changer. Effectively, that would mean at any point where someone in the state, be it a business or an individual, is ready to replace their heating and cooling system, in 1 out of 4 cases, it would make financial sense for them to choose the renewable heating and cooling option. At that point, you've created the foundation for that, for those technologies to really significantly increase their uptake rates. So that's the outline of our strategy. I'd like to finish perhaps with saying just a little bit more on cost reductions, because I know that's of keen interest. We split our analysis in 2 parts. Again, a consideration of what we call direct cost reduction opportunities, where a specific intervention from the government side could unlock cost reduction opportunities directly in the market. And then secondly, what we call indirect cost reduction opportunities, where you would expect ultimately the volume of deployed technologies to allow the market itself to unlock further cost reductions, a concept that we are, of course, very much familiar with from other technologies such as solar PV, land-based wind, offshore wind. On the direct cost reduction opportunities, we identified a number of specific policy options, which Scott will now cover in a little bit more detail. My final point on those indirect or volume-based cost reduction opportunities, that's really quite an open field. We were unable to find a significant amount of existing research into how that effect could play out in the heating and cooling sector. So we see that as an opportunity for further work to be done as we go forward over the next few years. So the numbers you were looking at on the previous slide in terms of how cost reduction opportunities can increase the amount of cost-effective resource, those numbers currently do not include the impact of volume-based cost reductions. Again, from our point of view, that's very much a field to watch out for in the coming years. So that's the wrap up on the strategic framework. And with that, over to you, Scott, to take us through our policy proposals.
Thanks, Eric. And actually, before I start, Rainey, can I just check in with you on time? We're about a minute over. Can I get your advice on how you want us to handle the rest of the webinar?
Yeah, Scott. So what we can do is, since we are running out of time, we can skip the question and answer session. So you can go ahead with your presentation. And in case there are any more questions, we will just direct them individually after the webinar is over. So we'll conclude after you finish speaking. There will be no Q&A session.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. And I'll actually be fairly brief. That was an excellent setup from Eric. And so, as Eric said, we identified a number of potential cost reduction strategies, some of which we're moving forward with in the near term, and some of which we're doing some more work on. And we hope to roll out in the midterm. Some of them have been mentioned by other speakers, and I'll kind of go through them sort of briefly right now. So we are looking at, we see clustering as an opportunity for cost reduction. I think Neil presented sort of this thermalized or heat smart concept as a marketing and awareness tool, which it certainly is. We're also seeing it as a cost reduction opportunity. Most of the community campaigns have actually negotiated a cost sort of reduction as part of the campaign, and we think that the clustering local clustering will enable contractors to do their work cheaper. Most of the cost reduction opportunities that we're looking at, I think maybe Eric may have mentioned this, are in the area of soft costs. Another soft cost reduction opportunity we see is a customer targeting and engagement tool. So we know that, especially right now in the near term, as a couple of other speakers hit on, the cost effectiveness of renewable heating and cooling is really dependent on the cost of fuels and the type of fuel that the customer is using. It also is dependent on the type of system that they have and how old it is. Most of these are end-of-life replacements. So enabling the market to find the customers with the best value propositions, we think, is going to significantly reduce soft costs, or has the potential to. We also think that there's an opportunity for standardization in the market, and through standardization of both equipment design and of equipment design and installation practices, we think that we can reduce the costs over time and also improve quality. Permitting is interesting for renewable heating and cooling. In New York, at least, there's highly variable. You have some technologies in some locations with virtually no permitting, and you have other places where the local permitting is extremely difficult to navigate for contractors, and it's different by every location. So doing unification of permitting and streamlining is another opportunity. There's a sort of a lack of awareness and experience broadly in the market on engineering and developing these projects, and certainly there are lots of people who know how to do this really well, but broadly in the market there's not enough experience. So providing technical engineering and engineering assistance can reduce the soft costs of developing projects, especially for larger projects in segments like college campuses. We also think there's a tremendous opportunity to integrate renewable heating and cooling into sort of the broader HVAC market, which we think will open up more opportunities for effective emergency replacements, and specifically since oil replacements represent pretty good cost-effective opportunities, there's an opportunity to sort of train the oil delivery businesses to offer renewable heating and cooling, or at least present them with the opportunity to do that. I think several of the speakers have talked about finance options, and clearly broadening the availability of cheaper finance options will reduce the costs compared to where the market's at right now, and hopefully lead to more adoption, which will then lead to those indirect cost reductions that Eric mentioned. And finally, we think there's an opportunity to work with our utilities and energy services companies to pilot third-party ownership models under our Reforming the Energy Vision here in New York, that we also think will lead to reductions in costs. So I have a couple of slides on mandates and incentives, which I'm actually not going to present because it wasn't the main topic. I'll just briefly mention that we're going to be launching a market continuity incentive for ground source heat pumps here in the next few weeks. And I probably should thank Peter McPhee and his team for sharing what they've learned on their program with us as we've rolled that out. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for your participation. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we won't be able to cover the Q&A. So this concludes today's talk on market strategies for renewable thermal technologies in New England. Neil, Peter, Jennifer, Laura, Eric, and Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. We also want to thank the Blueprint audience for all your questions. We will forward any remaining questions to our speakers. As Neil mentioned, this webinar was organized in cooperation with the Renewable Thermal Alliance. To view a recording of this webinar, please visit the Events tab on the Yale Center for Business and Environment website, or access the recording through the Yale iTunes University podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, this is Rohini Mukherjee from the Yale Center for Business and the Environment.